They sang real beautifully. I hope you guys were able to relish. We're up on Instagram. Please deal with that now, Shri. Thank you. Okay. I had a couple verses from the Gita. I've got 3 things on my mind, so we'll see how it goes. One thing I've got on my mind is Trumpism, just because it's dominated public discourse for so long, and even though it's winding down, it just takes a minute for the fan to completely turn off, even if you unplug it. So it's still on my mind. And then I've got these verses from the Gita on my mind also, and I've got a wedding like a very safe, COVID-safe wedding that we conducted yesterday on my mind as well. So I want to talk about all 3 of those things. So, and a conversation I had with a friend this morning, and a conference I attended this morning. So I mean, it's probably more like 5 things. Hey, Pujari! Pujari! No, tell them to be quiet. Thank you. They're like trying to let us know. I am Pujari, hear me roar. Okay. Well, we did a big wedding yesterday, and it was rough. Rough enough that I took a 4-hour nap today, which I mean, it must have been 10 years since I took a 4-hour nap. And so it took the wind out of my sails, like in a very powerful way. It was intense. There was a lot of rain. We made it into a destination wedding. We went and climbed up on top of a mountain to do wedding number 2, a white wedding on top of a mountain, along with the wedding in the temple. And everything had to be socially distanced, and a bunch of renovation projects. We had to feed everybody safely. It was quite the affair. And I was talking about it with my friend Madhuri this morning, and she was saying what a good time she had. And we were discussing how it's a lot of fun to do stuff selflessly for your loved ones. It's enjoyable. And we were thinking about just how enjoyable it was. She even made the point that even if her life isn't going 100% the way she wants it, being there for somebody else was still very sweet. Going the extra mile for somebody else, even when your own life is having difficulty, is very sweet. And I was agreeing with her and appreciating that sentiment a lot. Positive psychology, which is when you study what's right with people instead of what's wrong with people. It's the opposite of the pathology-based psychology, where you figure out the 80-some-odd mental illnesses and then how to treat them. Instead, you study what makes people happy, and you mimic that and emulate that, and then you become happy yourself by copying success instead of just trying to stave off or mitigate failure. It's positive psychology. It's been around for ages, but it formally was introduced into like actual academic study and practice, and the terminology was developed in the late 90s, 1998 to be precise. So it's a fairly new discipline in terms of like a rigorously defined discipline. They've done 50 million happiness studies at this point, and they have a really good idea of what makes people happy in any country of the world. And once you get above the basics of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of feeding people and giving them shelter, you can Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs if you don't know that one. Once you get above the basics of that, just getting people food and shelter so they don't die of hunger or cold, you get into being a part of something bigger than yourself. And actually, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you become socialized, and you get into art, and eventually get into self-realization. But if you look at all those upper rungs of his ladder or upper echelons of his pyramid, which are harder and harder to achieve, that's why they're higher up on the pyramid, because less people attain those. It's all about something bigger than yourself. Whether it's self-realization or community, it's all about being part of something bigger than yourself. That is, according to positive psychology, the single biggest ingredient in human happiness is to be a part of something bigger than yourself, to have a tribe that you're a part of. Familism, which is, the way, 6 billion people in the world live, is that you are not just an individual. This is our ethic in the United States is very much a rugged individualist ethic. It's my way or the highway. And, what's in it for me? And, find your bliss. And it's like all about personal happiness. For most of the world, for the vast majority of the world, you aren't just a person. You're a member of a family. You're a member of a tribe. This ethic is called familism. And so the decision which benefits your children, that decision is a good decision, even if it doesn't make you happy. To invest money that you'll never see come to fruition, but that your children will see, that's valuable. You get this with the, it's accredited to the Indians, maybe the Hopis, that the 7th generation, you should think about your actions and the impact they'll have on 7 generations. That's where you get that 7th generation soap from, that dish soap that everybody buys, that laundry detergent. It's the best priced one at Whole Foods. And so, anyway, it's the OG one. It's not the best price. 365 came out with a better one. It's cheaper, but it's the original one that came out. You think about something bigger than yourself. It's a secret, but it forces you to see a bigger picture. And you're no longer so myopically involved in just your own struggle, but you see yourself as part of something much bigger than yourself. And that broadens the playing field and gives you insights you wouldn't have otherwise, and makes today's austerities seem much more valuable because you're seeing both broader in terms of the people involved, but also broader in terms of time. And you're just a part of something bigger than yourself. So anyway, Madhuri was saying, yeah, it's like a wonderful thing. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, but, atheists can relish this too. Like when Trump didn't take over the government on January 20th, which is what the Trumpists thought, the followers of the religion of Trump thought, the QAnon. It's very much of what's called a big tent position, where they try to just get everybody in the kitchen sink involved. But if you look at the core of QAnon, Trump is the Messiah, and he's going to save the world, and he's going to save the world from a bunch of cannibalistic pedophiles, and they're going to have a moment of reckoning, essentially an apocalypse, and that's going to happen on January 20th. First, Trump was going to win the election. Then, when he didn't win the election, he was going to take over by military coup, and when that failed, then the military was going to get involved. On January 20th, there were going to be public executions. And so when that didn't happen, when the prophecy was shown to be false, people freaked out, and they got really spun. And we're talking at this point, a couple million people. It's not a small group. It's a big group. And so those people freaked out and got really spun because their prophecy didn't come true. This happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses. They thought they had an apocalyptic prophecy that was supposed to take place in the 70s, and when it didn't, their membership plummeted because, this happens all the time. Groups say this is what's going to happen. Sometimes, like with Jim Jones or with Heaven's Gate, they just tell other people to commit suicide because when the prophecy doesn't happen, then they make it happen, at least for those individuals, as macabre as that sounds. But yeah, you started hearing people say, hey, we made wonderful memories. Hey, we had a great time. It was a good run. In other words, they wanted to see there was some benefit that came out of this massive sacrifice they've made for this movement that didn't come to fruition. They didn't want to just admit we bet on the wrong horse, we blew it. They want to turn it into something beautiful. And so this desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself, anybody can provide that. You can join a salsa club and go salsa dancing or do ballroom dancing. And you feel like you're part of a bigger group, and there's some human touch involved, and there's some music, and you're working together with people conjointly, and you're dancing, and there's a possibility for romance, and it's that can be people, that they make that their religion, functionally. They make that special interest group what they're all about, or the gym becomes their special interest group, or their CrossFit box becomes their special interest group. Or sometimes they're into like collecting baseball cards, and that becomes their special interest group. And when you look at these people and you look at the experiences they have and why they're so devoted to the thing they're devoted to, it gets into, these people, and we share something in common, and I feel really close to them, and there's an intimacy that's involved. So we, the Hare Krishna movement, do not have a monopoly on that. We're just another group. And there's so many groups out there, and those groups all afford that connection to something bigger than themselves. You follow this? Even, you saw that guy with the Confederate flag walking to the Capitol. It was so offensive. We fought a war. 500,000 Americans died, and the losing side gets to, walk their flag through the hallowed halls of justice. It was really disturbing. But if you're familiar with American history, the South, the Confederacy, the Grays, it was the Grays versus the Blues. And so the Confederacy, the 11 southern states, that 11 or 12 southern states that tried to secede from the United States, they lost. And they lost 300,000 people. Mason was born just above the Mason-Dixon line, just above that line in Virginia that separated the North from the South, right, Mason? Yeah, he was born just right there. I asked him when he said he was from Virginia. I'm like, which part of Virginia? He's south of the Mason-Dixon line or north of it? He's like, oh, we're just north of it. That's the line of divide that separated our country into two, and the bloodiest battle in American history was fought. 300,000 Southerners died. And then what do? Like, you lost, and the people who conquered you were your neighbors. They all come down to start business down there. And your whole way of life has changed. And your land, your resources, slave labor. Literally slavery is free labor. Extremely inexpensive labor. You still have to feed the slaves and house them, but it's, not even pennies on the dollar. Our country was built on slavery. Cotton, sugar, tobacco, slavery. All the great American exports that literally built our country. It's impossible to estimate the value, especially when you start to add interest to it, of what the 400,000 slaves who came to this country, and then, I think it was 4 million of them eventually that were in this country at the peak. They built the country. And now all this free labor is gone. A lot of your land is gone. Your way of life is gone. And you're the losers. And so this gave birth to what's called the lost cause theory, which probably none of you have studied, but there's this whole thing where people from the South, the reason why they put up statues of the people who fought to, keep slavery. The reason why they put up statues, even in the last 50 years, and why they still wave Confederate flags, is they said, well, it wasn't about slavery. It was about the rights of the individual states. It was about not having the federal government come down and tell us what to do. It was about truly being a republic, something for the public, by the public, about the public. That's what republic means. And so it was being a true republic, truly independent states, freedom. It was about our freedom to choose our own destiny. The slaves were happy. They used to say that. The slaves were happy. They're less happy now. That one they don't say anymore because it's just insane. But for 50 years, 80 years, 100 years, up into the 60s, they would say this. And they developed this narrative that the Confederate soldiers were actually better fighters, they were more noble, they had more dignity, and they were simply overrun by the technological advancements and the vaster numbers of the North. But they were actually the better army. You know who else came up with this? Hitler came up with this. It's called the stab in the back theory. The Germans lost World War I, and they could not believe it. They were so disturbed that they lost World War I. So they came up with the stab in the back theory, which is the Jewish people actually ruined them from within. That their generals and their armies were better than any other army on the planet. They should have won World War I. But the Jewish who were living in Germany were saboteurs, and they were colluding with the enemy, and they, from within, poisoned the German people. And they gave critical information, and that's how the war was lost. There's no evidence of this, but anyway, that's how the war was lost. You know who came up with that? Hitler came up with that in Mein Kampf. In the 20s. Like in 24, 25, something like that. And then for 10, 12 years, they worked with that. And that became the Second World War. They have to turn their defeat into a victory. They have to turn their defeat into something noble. It was a great cause. It was a lost cause, but it was a noble cause. It was a good cause. It was a cause that should have won. And they reinvent the wheel. Because otherwise, what do they say? Like hundreds of thousands of our people, our brothers, our fathers, died for nothing. They were idiots. They were foolish. They were beguiled. It's too much. In fact, the whole lost cause thing, it was there during Reconstruction in the later part of the 19th century, the 1870s and 80s, but died out. But then it came back around World War I. It came back because the final Confederate soldiers were dying. You figure if you fought in 1865 and you were, let's say, 18 years old, right? By 1915, you were 68. By 1917, you were 70. The last of those people were dying off. And their loved ones didn't want their life to have been in vain. And so they had this whole thing where they started putting up statues of Robert E. Lee and all the Confederate generals and naming schools after him and naming streets after him. That happened in the 20s and 30s. We want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So we don't have a monopoly on that. Everybody who forms a group, even irrespective of the ethics of the group, if you're creative enough, you can turn it into something noble. You can turn it into something which, at least prima facie, at first glance, sounds beautiful. So when I was talking with Madhuri about how wonderful it was to be part of a wedding, everybody gets to be a part of a bigger group. We put on a school play, or, you know what I mean? We do anything. We did a Trump rally. Anybody can be part of something bigger. What do we have that makes us special? Well, we're dealing with the biggest questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? Well, all religions have that in common. At least all philosophies do. Well, we have a deity. Okay, all religions have that in common. We have a beautiful deity. Well, a few traditions have that in common. A very beautiful love and conception divinity. We also have a technology for how you can recapture that relationship. Even fewer traditions have that in common. And we also have people who are practicing that at a high level and showing the way. And you can jump up. And that's something special about what it means to be a part of this person's movement. This man's army is the classic saying, but I guess I can't say that anymore because I can't say the word man anymore. This person's army. We have the group. We have higher values, real ones that stand up to scrutiny. We grapple with the biggest questions of life. We don't just say, oh, we had some good times. We grapple with the biggest questions of life. We come up with beautiful answers to them. And we have a beautiful conception of divinity and a methodology for reinvigorating our relationship with that divinity. It's kind of like the greatest group you could ever imagine. If you had to write up a group and what they would look like what the best group in the world would look like, I think it would look like the Hare Krishna movement. Of course, I'm biased. That's why I'm a Hare Krishna devotee. I'm sure the Buddhists feel the same way. And that's what the value of comparative religion is. We can actually put our stuff down on paper and start to exchange ideas and see what's what. And, appreciate others for what they have, find common ground, but also find points of divergence, which isn't wrong to find points of divergence. It's not wrong to know who you are and what you're not. Good mission statements tell you who you are and they tell you what you're not. You don't want your mission statement to be so broad, unless you're like Target. Expect more, pay less. It's like they could start a university, but they could because they're a Fortune 50 company. They could do anything. They could start gas stations. They could start laundromats. They could start anything. They could do anything. They could start restaurants. Expect more, pay less. It's so broad, there's nothing they can't do. But for most groups, you don't want to do that because you don't have, whatever it is, hundreds of billions of dollars behind you. You need to think about what do we do, what do we not do. You got to distill down what you're about. And so when I look at what makes the Hare Krishna movement so amazing, it's a group. It's a group with higher values. It's a group with the highest values because it grapples with life's biggest questions. And it comes up with a spiritual solution, which gets to the heart of the problem. And it has a beautiful conception of divinity and a methodology for achieving that. We might not be the only group in town that can do that, but we are certainly a contender. We're certainly on the short list. When you look at other, like for instance, our conception of a romantic relationship with the deity, certainly that's there in Catholicism with the nuns. They're marrying Christ, but there's no actual methodology for dancing with Christ, for embracing Christ, for fully engaging in an intimate relationship with Christ. They don't have that. They have a notion, they have an idea, but they don't have a methodology for achieving that. You compare that, for instance, to Manjari Sadhana, the practice of loving Krishna romantically as articulated in our tradition. It's night and day. Just in terms of the literature that's devoted to the subject. What to speak of an actual detailed practice. Okay. Just the vegan thing crushes 95% of the competition. They haven't even figured that one out. They're not even in the running. They haven't even gotten out of bed yet, Or on mile 24 of a marathon, or on mile 98 of an ultra marathon, and they haven't even rolled out of bed yet. And so anyway, all right, so I don't want to become like a religious snob, but those are just a couple of thoughts, comparative religious thoughts, and looking at our tradition and what we have to offer, and looking at, and actually I don't think Trump's going to be able to recover, because if people die, like a lot of people die, like 300,000 people die, then millions of people are motivated to come up with a reason to keep that philosophy alive. You follow? Without that, you just kind of want to say, I was never that into it. That was never my thing. You delete your profile and just kind of pretend you never did that and kind of downplay it. No, I was just into it for the tax breaks. I was just a Republican for the tax breaks. And you start to just, you just kind of reformulate, reinvent yourself and hope nobody calls you out on it. Which is essentially what the Germans did after the Nazis. It became the worst thing in the world. The German laws of censorship for supporting Holocaust denial and neo-Nazis are severe. It's unbelievable what they do to you. That's eventually at some point it gets so bad, people just have to now they prove their credibility, not by walking away from it, by turning on it and becoming the most vigilant defenders of that very philosophy that they used to espouse. Anyway, enough of that. So I was thinking about these points were in my mind, and I was also thinking about I was just part of a conference today, a leadership conference, and normally leadership conferences talk about policies and things like that, and reinventing things, and they take a top-down approach. You deal with the leadership, and then they pass the baton, and they reformulate themselves. That's usually how it's done. But there's a modern move. It's there in software designing. It's Scrum theory versus waterfall theory. You can Google them if you want to, where you just get on the ground and you start moving through something and you troubleshoot on the way. And so there's this whole think globally but act locally. UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, a real big part of the UN. They came up with a constitution post World War II, and they said wars begin in the minds of men, and so peace has to also begin in the minds of men. You have to discuss things and get them in your head and think about them, and then they come to fruition, because when the idea becomes big enough, you end up becoming forced to act on it. That's really what happens. You get a big enough yes in somebody's mind, and then their behavior matches their cognition. You can work it the other way, work on their behavior and eventually change their mindset. But at some point, you have to directly engage with their mindset. At some point, you have to actually deal with the negative mindset. You can't just heal with the South. You have to attack the notions of slavery. You can't just heal with the Trumpists. You have to actually attack some of the negative ideals. Because without justice, mercy doesn't make much sense. It has to be tempered. There has to be a notion of justice. Otherwise, it just becomes this fake thing. You just don't talk about stuff. But anytime you do talk about stuff, like at the dinner table around Christmas time, all the old issues come up. So without justice, mercy becomes sentimental and impermanent, to be honest. There has to be some kind of a meeting of the minds that is critical, just as critical as the meeting of the hearts, a shared narrative. That's how real reconciliation takes place. So I was part of this leadership conference, but they did something different. They just had us all envision, blue sky thinking, what the world would look like if we accomplished everything we thought needed to happen for the Hare Krishna movement to become better. That way we weren't being critical. We weren't being negative. It wasn't like a pathology-based experience, what's wrong with our movement, but it was about what could be right with our movement. And the entire meeting was dedicated to that. And it wasn't big leaders, it was just everybody under the sun getting together. And I had a chance to sit with people I'd never met before and brainstorm with them, and they all had really cool ideas, and we developed some kind of group dynamic, and we got through it, and we figured it out, and we made a presentation to everybody, and it was artistic and creative. And I was working with a bunch of NRIs, non-resident Indians, who aren't normally the biggest brainstorming, creative, artistic bunch. They tend to be a lot more logical, but they put on this beautiful, dramatic performance, and I was stunned actually by what came out of our work together. And so I was thinking about this, just along with positive psychology, you can positively uplift even within a movement. You find a good movement, and then even within that movement, you can sort of recreate and uplift that movement. You follow? And so that's just me throwing that in there now, because I want to at least give an homage to that, mention it, however briefly. The last thing I want to mention, and we'll try and tie it all together in 5 minutes, is a couple of verses from the Gita. Matchita sarva durgani mat prasada tarishasi. Tarishasi, you will pass over. What? Sarva durgani, all difficulties. Durga means difficult. Durga, difficult to go. Durgani means difficulties. Sarva durgani, all difficulties. You'll pass over them. Tarishasi. How will you do it? Mat prasadat, by my grace. If you do what? Mat chitta, if you think of me. Ata chitvam ahankarat nashrosasi vinanxyasi. Or you'll be destroyed. Vinanxyasi. You'll be destroyed. How will you be destroyed? Ahankarat. If out of false ego, ahamkar, thinking I'm the only doer. Ahamkar literally means I do. It means you're the doer, you're in charge. Nashrosasi. If you will not listen to me, out of ego, you'll be destroyed. So Krishna gives you two options. By my grace, you'll pass over all difficulties if you just think of me. Or, if you won't listen, if you don't take this advice, you'll meet with destruction. And then running with that theme of what happens out of ego. Yat ahankara ashritya, taking shelter of your self-conceit, of your own ego. Na yotsya iti manite. You think I will not fight. Remember, Krishna wanted Arjuna to fight. You'll think, iti, you'll think this. Iti is quotation marks. Na yotsya, I won't fight. Mithyaisha Vyavyasayaste. Your resolution will be in vain. Prakrititvam niyokshati. Swabhava jena konteya nibadhasvena karmana. Your resolution will be in vain because by your karma, born of your nature, by the power of material nature, you'll end up fighting anyway. Against your will. Kartum na ichasi yanmahat. Out of delusion, against your will. Karishasi avashopitat. You'll act helplessly. So what Krishna's saying here is, you're going to fight in the battle regardless. You will either fight in the battle by my direction, and then I'll be able to help you, and you'll pass over all difficulties, and your life will be successful and fruitful. Or alternatively, you'll go your own way. You'll fight against the tide. You'll fight against the will of the divine. And then the will of the divine won't overwhelm you. Material nature and your karma and your ego will overwhelm you, and you'll end up fighting just the same. And so here was the point I wanted to make. We need to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We need to find some kind of tribe. We need to find something worth fighting for. We need to find something bigger than ourselves worth doing. If you think I'm not going to do that, you'll just end up with a lame group with lame values tied together by the fact that you guys all knit or ride bicycles or whatever dumb thing people are tied together by. Not being a part of something bigger than yourself doesn't really work. Anybody with like a reasonable amount of intelligence who's not just like a helpless narcissist ends up wanting to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So now it's just a question of which group are you going to join. We got a sexy group. We got a good group. We're grappling with the biggest questions of life. We got a methodology for achieving success and reuniting with the deity. We have a beautiful conception of divinity, a fabulous lifestyle. And if any way you're going to work hard and suffer and put on weddings and do this and do that and have to take 4-hour naps in the course of life, if any way you're going to do that, why not do it for something amazing? So you don't end up like a Trumpian, where you gotta like walk away from the whole thing and be like, well, at least we have, Casablanca. At least we have you're trying to like find some way to turn into a lost cause. You're trying to like the South, the Nazis, some just dumb cause you were a part of, some terrible cause you're a part of, and you've invested so much in it, you just can't admit you blew it. And so reflecting on these verses, I'm thinking, I got to be a part of something bigger than myself anyway. Let me be a part of the best thing. Let me be a part of Krishna consciousness. Let me find the best thing to be a part of and give my life to that and bleed for that and suffer for that. And then sleep peacefully and be happy and have lived a good life, a worthwhile life, being a part of something bigger than myself. And that movement starts on the ground. They were talking about what do you want ISKCON to look like and what do you want leadership in ISKCON to look like. And I didn't make a big deal about it. Private message the guy. But I said there's no difference. Our society is made up of a bunch of people. What these guys are doing then becomes what the group does. Because the group isn't a group. The group is just a bunch of people. And so really these two ideas collapse into one, as far as I can see. And you can work from the ground up. You can work locally. You get together with a tribe of people, a group of people who have similar values, and you start moving forward. You start doing amazing things together on a small scale, and that small scale is attractive, and it becomes a big scale. You don't need to work from the top down. You can work from the ground up. Anyway, these are some thoughts I had. I was reflecting on the wedding, how exhausted I was, what it means to be a part of a group, why I'm a part of this group, how people can be part of many different groups, how a lot of times all you have left to say is, oh, at least we made some good memories. The depth isn't there. And I started thinking about leadership from the ground up, servant leadership. blue sky thinking, positive psychology, how that can also affect how you transform an organization. And kind of all these ideas were swimming around in my head, and I didn't have enough time to decide between them. So I just gave you guys a bit of a smorgasbord, a bit of a gumbo, a bit of a borscht. And so there it is. Thank you very much. We're going to do Kirtan now. Thanks so much for attending. We'll talk to you soon. Hare Krishna. You can stay and be here for the Kirtan. Thank you.